Hello, I'm Elizabeth Bonker, Executive Director of Communication for All, a nonprofit with the mission to ensure all non-speakers with autism have access to communication and education. I am honored to speak with you today because I know how hard you work to help children with special needs feel better, and we are tough nuts to crack. I have benefited from the care of so many great doctors, including Jeff Bradstreet and Sid Baker. Sometimes it feels like the world has forgotten us, but you haven't forgotten us. You are here. I am humbled to try to piece together our 2-year experiment that took me from fight or flight to safe mode, in the hopes that you will fill in the missing pieces and help millions who suffer in silence. I am excited to talk with you about our 2-year HRV experiment that took me from self-injury to successful college student. As you know, the autonomic nervous system can't be measured directly, but we can indirectly measure its balance through heart rate variability. My HRV reflected my dysregulation, and we were able to see it change with a series of natural interventions. I am not a doctor, and neither is my mother. We worked collaboratively with a researcher in California and are grateful for her knowledge and commitment. Her career includes 17 years in cardiac and neurological business units of a large medical device company. She also holds patents in wearable HRV monitoring. I will be referring to her as Rachel in honor of Silent Spring author Rachel Carson. I asked Rachel to present with me, but she declined. Her research has moved away from autism because there is more funding in other areas. We also asked her to publish my case study so others could benefit, but she said she was immersed in her new work. So, my mother and I have endeavored to put the pieces of the puzzle together as best as we could, from hundreds of her emails filled with data analysis, research reports, and hypotheses. Please forgive us if we don't get all of the scientific terms and theories characterized perfectly. We did our best. Our goal is to pique your interest so we can fill in the missing pieces of an HRV protocol for autism. Millions of non-speakers with autism are suffering in fight or flight, and my hope is that you will use what we have learned in my case study to help them. To create an HRV for autism protocol, Rachel focused on 3 areas. The first is Dr. Stephen Porges' polyvagal theory. The second is Dr. Roland McCrady's coherence studies. And the third is Dr. Robert Navio's cell danger response, including his work with Sermon. Let's briefly review each theory. Dr. Porges proposed polyvagal theory in 1994. He published this groundbreaking book in 2011 and has written more than 400 peer-reviewed papers. Here is a short video of Dr. Porges describing polyvagal theory.
Our nervous system is functionally a triangle upside down, okay, with a point. This is the brainstem. I'm talking about the circuits that are being regulated in the brainstem that regulate our underlying state, percolate information up to the brainstem, and the brainstem literally is transmitting that information to higher brain structures, enabling access to different brain areas. So that when we're in safe states, we can access higher cortical functions, but when we're in dangerous states, those systems turn off and we're defensive. If we think of this triangle, and each time we get higher and higher, we have greater diversity of expression and outcome. So I'm talking about basically 3 states that provide a neural platform for great diversity of expression. If you are in a constant dangerous environment, your nervous system is going to find it difficult to detect safety. So if it can't detect safety, it's going to be in the state of more fight, flight, a low threshold to react. And when you're in that state, you're going to misread other people's cues. So you're more likely to see neutral faces as being aggressive. You're more likely to see fearful faces as if they were angry. So you can really confound difficult relationships. So you won't be able to use people to self-regulate. They'll become threatening and reactive. So if you have a history in which there is no experiences of using people to regulate in a very pro-social positive way, people will then become threatening or damaging to you. And what I always want to emphasize is that the social interactional behavior is a neural exercise. It's a neural exercise of using newer mammalian structures, in a sense evolutionary newer structures, to inhibit very primitive defensive systems. So
As all of you know, the vagus nerve carries signals between the brain, heart, and digestive system as part of the parasympathetic nervous system. The sympathetic nervous system provides the fight or flight response to perceived danger. Together, the parasympathetic and sympathetic nervous systems make up the autonomic nervous system. Polyvagal theory has three defining principles. First is the hierarchy of the autonomic nervous system, second is neuroception, and third is co-regulation. Even Oprah wants to get in on the vagal nerve conversation. During the final preparation for this talk, one of my non-speaking friends sent us this link. Stephen Porges is quoted, and some of the same interventions we will be discussing are recommended to help anxiety-ridden people turn off their parasympathetic response to the crazy world around them. In polyvagal theory, the hierarchy of our autonomic nervous system has evolved into three principal states in which we feel relaxed, mobilized, and/or immobilized. Shifting between these states happens subconsciously through neuroception, our ability to scan our environment and our body for safety or danger. We naturally send out signals of safety or danger to each other in a process called co-regulation. Polyvagal theory states that the vagus nerve has two main branches, the ventral and dorsal. We are in safe mode when we are on the ventral vagal nerve. We shift to the dorsal vagal nerve when we perceive danger. This sympathetic response is also called fight or flight. We can get pushed to freeze mode when we feel completely overwhelmed. Our goal is to get non-speakers out of fight or flight and onto their ventral vagal nerve. We want to create resilience that allows us to appropriately shift from parasympathetic to sympathetic and back again with accurate neuroception. The second research area for our framework is Dr. McCrady's coherence studies. Dr. McCrady has done decades of HRV work and currently directs research for the nonprofit HeartMath Institute. This book describes emotional and physiological coherence, and Dr. McCrady explains the basics in this short video clip.
Our basic research done here at the HeartMath Research Center focused more on the physiology of how the heart and brain communicate. Interestingly, a lot of people are surprised to learn that the heart sends more information through the nervous system to the brain than the other way around. And that sounds like some new discovery, but it's not. This has actually been known since the late 1800s. It's basic physiology. But this is important because the quality of these signals sent from the heart to the brain have profound effects on brain function, our mental clarity, even our emotional experience. So the brain is largely interpreting the signals from the heart to create how we feel. So this is why we focus on the heart so much, because if you can shift the rhythms of the heart, you can quickly improve brain function, reduce feelings of anxiety, stress, overwhelm, and so on. But it takes a different doorway, the heart. So the HeartMath tools and techniques are really designed to shift the rhythms of the heart, which changes the ascending information from the heart to the brain, which is absolutely necessary in order to establish a new baseline. And without establishing a new baseline, we really can't, it's impossible to have sustained change or improvements in our health and our emotional experience. So when we get our systems coherent and have the alignment between heart and brain, that's really when we access that deeper intuition.
As you saw in the video, McCrady's research focuses on how the heart and brain affect each other. As this chart shows, that is a complex set of interactions via the sympathetic pathway shown in blue arrows, the parasympathetic pathway shown in orange arrows, and the afferent pathways shown in red arrows. Heart rate variability is the natural fluctuation of the time between heartbeats determined by how the autonomic nervous system processes internal and external stimuli. The sympathetic nervous system accelerates the heart, and the parasympathetic vagal nerve slows it down. Rachel hypothesized that a non-speaker's sympathetic nervous system could be activated internally by chronic inflammation and oxidative stress, and externally by frustration and PTSD because of our inability to communicate. HeartMath Institute's research shows that when we are in fight or flight mode, our data for respiration, HRV, and blood pressure rhythm look jagged like on the left side of these graphs. When we are in safe mode, they are smooth or coherent, as pictured on the right. This optimal state of autonomic balance shows up as a large, narrow peak at about 0.1 Hz on the power spectral analysis of HRV, as shown in the bottom right graph. Rachel explained that this coherent state is consistent with Porges's detection of a peripheral marker of cardiac-linked parasympathetic regulation. Our third and final area of research is Dr. Robert Navio's antipyrenergic theory for autism. Dr. Navio's lab at UC San Diego focuses on the role of mitochondria and metabolism in complex disorders. In this 2017 study, he asked the question, are the symptoms of autism caused by a treatable metabolic syndrome that traces to the abnormal persistence of a normal, alternative functional state of mitochondria? Dr. Navio's answer is the cell danger response hypothesis. I won't pretend to understand this level of biology, but I experienced it for 18 months when I had pediatric acute onset neuropsychiatric syndrome, or PANS, in middle school. Navio suggests that the immune response to a danger, such as a virus, is intended to be acute and situational but appears to be chronically activated in autism. Here is an ABC News report on his important work.
A California clinical trial could unlock one of the mysteries of autism. In tonight's Health Watch, Action News anchor Margot Kim shows us the research that could lead to a breakthrough.
Dr. Robert Navio suspected the cause of autism might be metabolic dysfunction, where the energy molecule ATP is outside cells. He researched more than 2,000 drugs and found one that might help. That drug was Suramin. Dr. Navio tested one dose in a clinical trial of 10 boys. 5 got the drug.
Children began to talk sometimes for the first time in sentences in their life.
Boys who got Suramin had autism severity scores drop from 8.6 to 7, the lowest point on the spectrum. They improved social, language, and fine motor skills and found relief from repetitive motions and fragmented sleep.
Rachel hypothesized that high doses of CBD oil could replace Suramin, which has toxicity issues, to turn off persistent cell danger response and help non-speakers reach autonomic balance. She explained to us how an important component of regulating the autonomic nervous system and HRV are cis loops, a family of ligand-gated ion channels that regulate the inhibitory neurotransmission pathway. She focused on 3 reflex points that will be targeted by our interventions: the GABA-A cis loop, the serotonin 5-HT3 cis loop, and the nicotinic acetylcholine cis loop. Each point is governed by nicotinic and purinergic signaling receptors. If the receptors are desensitized, cell danger response cannot resolve. Suramin targets these receptors. Research shows how cis loops are affected by electromagnetic frequencies. This paper by Dr. Martha Herbert discusses how EMF causes damage to core cellular processes. In addition, Rachel believed continuous EMF exposure causes a reversal of GABA from inhibition to excitation. GABA cis loop receptors are activated by GABA, an important inhibitory neurotransmitters. Rachel believed noni juice and collagen powder would help deactivate these receptors for me. The serotonin cis loop receptors regulate the hypothalamic pituitary adrenal axis. The HPA axis regulates the stress response and the release of cortisol. Rachel explained how the HPA axis relies on a series of hormonal signals to keep the sympathetic nervous system engaged. The nicotinic cis loop regulates the cholinergic anti-inflammatory pathway. This pathway plays a key role in controlling the inflammatory response through interaction with the vagus nerve. Rachel believed this paper was essential to getting me out of fight or flight because it describes how the cholinergic pathway functions as an interface between the brain and the immune system. In summary, Rachel based her work on the theory that my current dysregulated state included a cell danger response that was stuck, cis loop pathways not functioning properly, putting me in fight or flight on the dorsal branch of my vagal nerve. Our experiment's goal was autonomic balance. To get me in safe mode on the ventral vagal branch with coherence at peak power of 0.1 Hz. It was life-changing for me, and I believe it can be life-changing for millions of non-speakers with autism. How do we get there? Let's look at the interventions, and please note I was not on any medications. I wore a heart rate sensor with a chest strap during monitoring. You can buy one online for under $100. The data was collected with an iPhone app and processed with a free version of Cubios software. Cubios's HRV software is being used for research in about 1,800 universities in 150 countries. We have a detailed guide for this analysis. The Cubios Scientific Light software produces a report on a single sheet of paper. We broke it up into 3 sections so you would be able to read it better. This top section of the report shows the data for a typical 15-minute recording. Rachel would then select a 5-minute segment, marked here as the small red box. This segment was often around a bump or other anomaly in the data. That selected segment, shown in the larger red box, is used in the analysis. The middle section is Cubios's proprietary indexes of parasympathetic and sympathetic nervous system activities. The goal is to have the PNS index as high as possible and the SNS index as low as possible. My data showed the exact opposite. The bottom section of the report shows various HRV analyses. Of all of the charts, we usually focused on the frequency domain HRV parameters in the red box. You may remember a similar graph from the McCready discussion. Here is my dysregulated state compared to the autonomic balance goal from McCready's coherence studies. Now let's discuss the interventions we used to get me there. CBD oil was essential to our experiment. Rachel explained how we would use CBD in high doses for short periods to modulate cell energy through ATP and adenosine. We tried several formulations and settled on a 6x concentrated formula with whole plant terpenes. As discussed in this paper, certain terpenes reduce inflammation symptoms by decreasing the release of pro-inflammatory cytokines. I got a medical marijuana card, and we tried various products. I didn't like most of them because they made my thinking fuzzy. That was not the case with the lowest ratio of THC to CBD. We sometimes used it instead of the CBD oil. Rachel believed EMF disrupts neurotransmitter function and that nighttime EMF is especially dysregulating to cells. She believed that removing EMF would allow the ventral vagus to restore inhibition and sensory gating. Rachel hypothesized that a nicotine patch could activate my nicotinic receptor and balance the last pathway to land on the ventral vagal nerve and gain medulla autonomic nervous system control. I used a grounding mat or grounding sheet when Rachel thought my data called for it. I would sit with my bare feet on the mat for an hour or more, and occasionally I would sleep on the grounding sheet. Research shows that grounding our bodies has anti-inflammatory effects. Meditation helped to quiet my mind. For 10 to 15 minutes, I would lie slightly propped up on my bed in a darkened room with eye shades and a blanket. Sometimes, I would listen to classical music or guided meditations. Straw breathing is a technique of breathing in through your nose and out through a straw. The straw helps to elongate the outgoing breath. Studies show how slowing the breath helps produce a calming effect, and although it was difficult for me to do at first, it did make me feel calmer. I did guided breathing exercises using an HRV coherence device occasionally, and I may have sped up my progress if I had used it daily. The biofeedback app makes a sound when you are in parasympathetic frequencies. Rachel told us how other subjects she worked with took about 6 weeks of daily practice to see a significant shift to parasympathetic. This 2022 study provides a useful overview and summary of the significant amount of peer-reviewed research that support this practice. Especially near the end of my journey, I listened to auto-tuning fork tones on an app. Rachel believed the tones would affect my brain waves through the thalamic pacemaker, relax my body tissues, reduce inflammation, and release nitric oxide. She would recommend frequencies of 32, 64, or 128 Hz based on my data. Sometimes listening to the tones for 8 minutes on headphones would make me feel more agitated, and we would try a different frequency. We used Auto 128 quite a lot when I was getting closer to coherence. I know this intervention may be more out there than the others, but these tones did affect my nervous system in different ways at different points in my journey. This 2021 paper describes the history of vibroacoustic, or sound frequency therapy, and modern applications for affecting cells and the brain. Exercise was also important to me to feel regulated. When I could walk on the beach with bare feet, it had the added benefit of grounding my body naturally. I wore blue light reducing glasses while on a computer, especially in the late afternoon and evening, so I could sleep better. This was my daily schedule for supplements. This list changed over time, but it gives you a sense of what I was taking. In particular, Rachel highlighted the importance of sulforaphane for detox and immune support, and the combination of lutein and zeaxanthin to guard against the damage of free radicals. I drank a daily smoothie that was not delicious, but I choked it down for science. The ingredients changed over time, but greens and blues were a constant. Studies show noni juice antagonizes serotonin receptors and agonizes the inhibitory GABA pathways. I drank a lot of diluted noni juice. I used an infrared sauna a few times. Rachel asked me to read a book in the sauna to engage my brain and hypothesized exposure to far infrared wavelengths would counterbalance my HRV high frequencies. I did not use a vagal nerve stimulator. We asked Rachel about buying one, but she nixed the idea. Now, before we dive into the data, I would like to show you a short clip from a 2020 documentary called In Our Own Hands. You will see that when we started, we used a different heart rate monitor. I hope this will give you a sense of how this data was collected.
All right, here we go. All right, we have your sensor here. You've got to plug it into the battery, as we always do. We have taken Elizabeth across the country and seen dozens of specialists. We have tried virtually everything you can try. She has done stem cells, she's done hyperbaric oxygen, sacrocranial therapy, neurofeedback therapy, supplements. Right over your heart. You name it, we have done it. There. Right now, we're on a mission with a heart monitor device that Elizabeth is wearing. It found it, and so she is being monitored, all her vital signs, syncing, and our researcher is in California.
Before we look at my data, I would like to share how Rachel described the big picture in scientific terms. She hypothesized that my current dysregulated state was characterized by high purinergic signaling. I had no resolution through my anti-inflammatory endocannabinoids pathway. High acetylcholine and high dopamine. GABA-A was excitatory versus inhibitory, and I had altered serotonin and dopamine activating receptors for tryptophan and tyrosine. In addition, my autonomics were running off the suprachiasmatic nucleus, pineal, pituitary pathway. That was a mouthful. I'm thankful that you understand this better than I do. I am laying this framework out as Rachel explained it to us. Our goal was autonomic balance. We would achieve it by using CBD to activate the triphasic CB1, CB2 anti-inflammatory state in my brain. Rest my nicotinic receptors to regain anti-inflammatory signaling function. Reduce my chloride levels to restore inhibitory GABA-A regulation. And reach coherence with peak power at 0.1 Hz. Now it's time for the data. It is July 2017. I had just graduated from an online high school and decided to take a gap year before college. I needed to get control over my body, and I was excited that Rachel wanted to help me. We had met several times because we were both members of a group in Silicon Valley trying to use data and technology to figure out autism. I am going to fly through 20 slides of data, selected from hundreds of HRV reports from the 2-year experiment, because we believe they contain the key pieces of the puzzle. On most slides, there will be a 15-minute baseline taken in the morning, a recommended intervention, and another reading. The red box shows the data for the graph displaying power by frequency. The red arrow points to the peak power in the low frequency band that Rachel focused on. This is our first report, and as you can see, there was not much change with just exercise. We were just getting started. We experimented with the interventions for 9 months, and I won't bore you with all that data. Some interventions made me feel better and some worse. Rachel got my feedback and each result helped fill in the pieces of the puzzle. This data reading was selected because it is the start of using CBD oil. We started with a small amount, only 30 milligrams. Rachel interpreted the data to show that I moved from chronic adenosine A1 up to the A2A anti-inflammatory pathway. She had access to microfrequency analysis that gave her additional information, but she did not share it with us. I felt we were making progress. This time, I used the grounding mat for a half hour and then listened to auto-tone frequency 128 Hz for 8 minutes. Rachel thought these interventions would smooth the 0.3 Hz bump in the first graph. The second graph shows success with increased power across the frequency range. I felt calmer and hopeful. At this point, almost a year into the experiment, Rachel recommended 3 infrared sauna sessions because she believed far infrared wavelengths would counterbalance my HRV high frequencies. At the same time, she focused on the GABA glutamate pathways. GABA becomes excitatory with excess chloride. Her GABA interventions were to shut off the Wi-Fi EMF at night, noni juice, and collagen powder. My results were very positive with a peak near 0.1 Hz and less power in the high frequencies. This was the summer before college, and I was feeling like I would be able to sit in a classroom without too much difficulty. 3 weeks later, my baseline was low on power across the board. After interventions of 20 milligrams of CBD and the grounding mat, I had more power and it was more evenly distributed in the lower frequencies. After 4 more months of experimentation, Rachel hypothesized we were halfway there on the inflammatory reflex. The literature indicates to do a nicotine patch, but given my previous reaction to it, she suggested the grounding mat for a few hours. The goals were to stimulate norepinephrine and close the nicotinic cis loop. There was a lot of trial and some error. In this trial, the straw breathing shifted the peak to the right, but too far. My inability to master straw breathing was making me feel anxious. That would change over time. At week 79, we started to focus on the CBD oil dosing with the 6 times concentrated formula. Here 32 milligrams shifted the peak toward 0.1 Hz. The data looked better with a low-frequency peak starting to form, and I was feeling better, but always worried that a panic would happen in my classes. I felt ready to try a big experiment. Rachel thought I was ready too. That weekend, we began a process she called flooding. Our goal was to flood my cell receptors with high doses of CBD for 3 days to turn off my cell danger response. After 75 and 100 milligrams, we saw good results. She interpreted the 0.1 and 0.4 Hz peaks in the second graph as healing and activity of the parasympathetic nervous system. Rachel thought we were making good progress on the second day of flooding the cell receptors. The peak was closer to 0.1 Hz and power was more evenly spread across frequency bands. I was hopeful and sleepy during the flooding. After the flooding, she recommended a flush of no CBD for 2 days and then a small amount of CBD with tryptophan and 5-HTP in the late afternoon to convert to the serotonin pathway. The results were heading in the right direction, but I would need another flooding. A few days later, we did the second flooding. I took 100 milligrams of CBD 3 times per day. As expected, this level of CBD made me very sleepy. The results were good for now, but Rachel didn't want me to stay at this profile. In the past, I had felt like an electric current was twitching in my extremities. Now it was calming down. During the second flush, Rachel noted my elevated RMSSD, or root mean square of successive differences between normal heartbeats. She thought my RMSSD should be less than 20 and I was at 44. I would need a third flooding. On the first day of the third CBD flooding, she increased the dosage and we saw improvement after the second CBD dose. Now I felt very sleepy all day and remember waking up hunched over on my computer. On the second day, you can start to see the 0.1 Hz peak forming. The sleepiness was starting to feel like internal calmness. On day 3, Rachel told me that we had an unexpected result, a big increase in a serotonin receptor that controls oxytocin. During the third flush, Rachel said my ATP was elevated and recommended meditation. The result was an incredible positive shift in my low to high frequency ratio. Coherence. After almost 2 years, I was free from constant anxiety and could sit calmly in my college classes. I could control my body and vocalizations so much better and enjoy life with my family. Coherence changed my life. Coherence holding. Rachel believed I hadn't been able to fully access the benefits of auto-frequency tone 128 because of desensitized nicotinic receptors. Now I could. Here I am, a month later. Still coherent, but Rachel recommended auto-frequency tone 64 and 128 with the grounding mat, and the result was 0.1 and 0.4 Hz peaks for healing. 2 months later, look at that beautiful peak and that low frequency to high frequency ratio. We accomplished our goal of using Navio's theory to turn off my cell danger response, matching McCrady's coherence studies, and following Porges' polyvagal theory to land me on the right branch of my vagal nerve. This is what I want for everyone with autism who suffers in fight or flight. How do I stay coherent? I certainly don't do these interventions every day or even every week, but I use them to maintain my autonomic balance. When I do get out of balance, 15 milligrams of CBD oil usually does the trick. My family and I would like to publicly thank the dedicated researcher who tirelessly worked with us to get me out of fight or flight. I hope my case study can help you advance the use of HRV for your patients. Of all the interventions, I believe the 3-day CBD flooding and 2-day flushes were the most impactful. Daily relaxation sessions doing meditation or straw breathing also helped to calm me. And some basic supplements, and turning off the Wi-Fi at night wouldn't hurt. Would this be a reasonable starting point to work out an HRV for autism protocol? My ultimate dream is to take the new HRV protocol that you all work out and get it programmed as an application for a watch. The screen will glow red for fight or flight, green for coherence, and yellow for in between, based on HRV data. If it glows yellow or red, an intervention would be suggested to get back to green. Even if we never get to the glowing watch, millions of non-speakers with autism are depending on us to figure out the HRV for autism protocol. With your work, you can free them from the horrors of fight or flight. You can give them the gift of safety. You can help them to communicate, be educated, and live better lives.
We are in here. We are in here. We are in here.
Thank you.